Thanks for tuning in to a post NFL Draft 2020 edition of Jets FM on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. And for Jet fans out there who are interested in finding out, well, just how did my team do? Well, Jan, I feel we've talked in the past about pretty good first round picks, Sam Darnold, Jamal Adams. You're always hopeful about some of the picks that your GM makes. Everybody's hopeful. Uh, but I know the difference between being hopeful and hitting a home run. And Joe Douglas proved everything that we were hoping that he would prove with the draft, with taking the players that looked like the players that should fit in with this system well, where he took the players, how he traded to get more picks, and of course also, which we'll get into a little bit later on, just how well he's already done with signing players who did not get drafted. So an incredible effort. 9 players in total, a new NFL cornerback thanks to a trade, an additional 2021 pick. He took team captains and 4-year players. 8 of his 9 players are 4-year college players. The only one who wasn't, Becton. Not bad, huh?
Not bad. I know your view. We'll get into it. I think he did a good job. Granted, look, in general, we all know that we won't really be able to evaluate a draft until about 3 years after the draft. So all of what we're saying now is based upon projection, and until they get on the field, whenever that may be, and we start to see how the talent coalesces and shines, hopefully, it's impossible to put a grade on it. But that's kind of what we do. It's every sports fan does, and what we're going to do probably associated with this overall draft. So I share your affinity for the draft to a certain extent, but I'm not quite sure if I share it to the extent that you share it.
Okay, well, we talked about Becton in our first round show, which happened actually live on Thursday, and there's enough excitement, confidence that Jet fans should have on Becton. So we'll move on and talk about what happened since then, starting with a great move. Denzel Mims sliding down. Instead of taking him, nobody would have blinked if the Jets would have taken him at 48. And what Douglas was able to do was make a trade, bring in an extra pick, a third round pick, and still was able to grab Denzel Mims at pick number 59.
Yeah, I think we talked about the need for a wide receiver, and pretty much I think it was fairly clear that we're going to go for a wide receiver with that second round pick at 48. And as you mentioned, Douglas, as we thought he might, did trade down, acquired pick 101 as part of the trade, sliding down to 59. And then the pick right after 48, where he would have gone, Chase Claypool went into the Steelers. So that was one guy off the board that we had talked about that I had liked, and a lot of people thought might even last to the third round. And then Van Jefferson went also in that round, and we're all going, and you see the picks kind of slotting down, and Mims is still on the board. And look, Mims brings a tremendous amount of speed. A couple of people have called him a Robbie Anderson-esque type of receiver, partly because while he has the speed, the other thing he needs to work on, which is something he didn't do at Baylor, was his route tree. Right, he needs to run routes. He needs to learn all the routes. The good part is the Jets have a very good wide receiver coach, which should help him as he was able to do for Anderson. So at 59, getting the pick we both thought might have gone at 48, while adding the other pick is clearly a win-win. And you got a guy who projects to have tremendous upside and should be a key member of your wide receiving crew as early as this season.
Yeah, the Jets went ahead with their first 2 picks, did exactly what we had anticipated they were going to do. They get their offensive tackle, potentially the tackle with the highest upside, and then they get their receiver with the potential of being a number 1 receiver and able to get that player who could have easily been a first-round draft pick, and nobody would have blinked. You mentioned his speed. Let's also mention his size, because both Perryman and Mims are 6'2" receivers with speed. So that's huge, because basically what you've already done is you've replaced. Somebody made a comment about Mims replacing Anderson. That's not the case. Perryman will replace Anderson. Mims now comes in, so now you've got Perryman will hopefully take over Anderson's role and if we're lucky, do better. And Mims will be somebody like you said because of he's got to learn a little bit more about the NFL game. He's got to clean up his concentration drops, which have been an issue over his career. So there are a little few red flags, which is probably why he dropped. But you're talking about a guy that now has a chip on his shoulder, a player who in his last 3 years, 37 games, averaged 60 receptions, 967 yards, and a 16-yard average, and 9 touchdowns per year. And it's also a physically tough receiver, too. So he brings a lot to the table. And I think after those first 2 picks, the Jets get the tackle, the Jets get the receiver, they get 2 excellent prospects. And I don't think at this point Jet fans should be in any way upset or concerned. This is so far so good.
Absolutely. I think as you said, we talked a lot about going for the offensive lineman first, given the depth of receiver, and getting a guy at 59 who you could have gotten at 48 and might have even gone earlier in some circles. Well, it was a coup for Douglas. So, you're looking through 2 picks, you filled 2 major needs with 2 guys with tremendous upside and players that you both come in maybe with a little bit of chips on their shoulder. Bector because he wanted to be the number 1 guy, and Mims who thought he should have gone a lot earlier in the draft.
Okay, also, and we'll get into the player analysis in a minute, but keep in mind, after they made the trade with Seattle and received that 3rd round pick 101, they would later trade that pick to New England, of all teams, and acquire a couple of extra picks. So in all, the Jets ended up with 3 extra picks, which in turn, again, we'll get into who those players exactly were in a little bit, but they got 2 players and a 2021 pick, so not bad maneuvering. And that was also something we said that had to happen, that Douglas had to trade down, whether he did it in round 2 or round 3. He did it in round 2, which gave him a head start, so he could also trade down in round 3 to get those additional couple of picks, and of course also the pick for next year. Okay, now let's get to the 3rd round pick, Ashton Davis. And Davis is going to be an interesting player because of the fact another 4-year player, a walk-on track star. He basically used track to get into college football, and that was his calling card. He wanted to get noticed, so the speed got him noticed. He had a very solid couple of years, the last 2 years, that even some people thought he could have been a late 1st round draft pick. Everything changed for him those last 2 years when Justin Wilcox became the head coach at Cal. Justin Wilcox, a defensive head coach. Sonny Dykes was the coach before that. Cal would be in these 50 to 49 games every week. They couldn't play any defense. Well, in comes Justin Wilcox, and then the games turned into 10 to 7 games the last 2 years. And Davis was a big part of that. His DB coach, Gerald Alexander, who was a 2nd round draft pick in 2007 for Detroit, was actually hired by Miami in January as their DB coach. So he learned a lot from him as well. But Davis brings excellent speed and a player that is an ascending player that a lot of people believe his best is yet to come.
So a couple of things on Davis. So clearly, one of the things that was brought up is once Davis was selected, and he's a safety, but he has played a bit of cornerback. Was what does this mean for Jamal Adams? And pretty much nothing. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. If anything, it means it's more likely for him to remain because the guy who could be at risk, quote unquote, is Marcus May.
If he doesn't stay healthy, yes.
Right. Well, not even just staying healthy. Right? We talked a lot about trying to sign May early and locking him up long term, and maybe this is an indication that the asking price that May has right now is going to be beyond the budget where the Jets want to pay, based upon the fact that they're going to try to keep Adams and make him a Jet for life.
Yeah, but they could just sign him for the option and pay him nothing, and then they get him for another year.
Right? We talk about upside potential.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I understood the Davis pick. I personally really wanted Josh Jones at that pick at 72 and 72 to Arizona. I thought getting another offensive lineman there, getting one who slid down the board, who was somebody who was projected in some circles to go late 1st round, might have been the better play. I mean, you had Zach Baum go afterwards, would have been a linebacker, could have been interesting with them trading down later on. They missed out on Matt Hennessy, which is another guy who I thought they might have gone there, who's a local product from New York. Went to Temple, was a guy who also would have solidified their offensive line, or they could have gone cornerback. So the Davis pick to me, while I like the pick, I can't say that I love the pick. I do think he might have been available a little bit later. But I understand the need for it, especially with Williams is going to like to move guys around and play them in different positions and may not necessarily go with traditional defensive back setups all the time. You could use Davis as a high safety, which is what he'd been used. You can play him periodically at corner, but there were other guys at that place that I wanted them to take more so than I wanted them to take Davis.
Well, there were probably players that were on the board every time the pick came up that I wish the Jets had taken and they didn't. But that's now how I will look at this. I'll look at this as, okay, who are my players, and are these good players, and are they players that I'm willing to buy into? Where even though I agree with you, I'm not completely sold that Davis is going to turn out to be a player that, because you draft him in the third round, you want that guy to be a major contributor, which he has to be. It doesn't mean that Marcus Bay needs to be kicked out and Davis needs to take over, but it means that he needs to be a number 3 safety who gets a lot of playing time. And if he doesn't become that, and he needs to play a lot of special teams, you got to utilize his speed. So he's got to be on kick. He's got to be on the kick return game. He has to be. He's been primarily a kick returner, punt return game a little bit, but mostly kick return game. So he's got to be a part of the kick return game. He's also got the ability to line up in the slot. So, and I'm fine where they picked him in general, because like I said, look, I think the Jets actually probably, if they liked the kid, benefited with the fact that he didn't run with the injury that he had. He didn't run at the combine, and he didn't get a chance to run on pro day, because if he would have had an opportunity to run on pro day at the combine, he would have ran really fast and he wouldn't have lasted this long.
No, I agree with you. I mean, there's a couple of players where the Jets benefited from the lack of the pro day, or the lack of maybe the combine because of injuries, and this is a situation where Davis is one of those players. Like I said, I evaluated too as not just the player who they got, but maybe the other needs that could have been filled as well, and the place where that player was selected. And as you said, Davis in the third round, maybe he probably would have gone higher if there was a pro day. But also the question is how does he fit into the scheme? Will he live up to the draft location, which is a key also, based upon, especially as I look at it, where other guys who could have potentially filled needs went.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was surprised too that Zach Bond lasted as long as he did, but wasn't it just the Jets that thought that, or Josh Jones? I mean, if these guys were as good as we all thought they were going to be, late first round draft picks, then they would have been taken late first round. So apparently there was a little bit of an issue with a couple of those players, and there were a few more too that slid down a lot further along than any of us thought. But it happens at every draft. Why? Who knows? Maybe we'll find out in the coming weeks why certain players lasted as long as they did. With the second third round pick, the Jets took Zabari Zuniga from Florida, and the second fastest defensive lineman at the combine. Some of the reports, how they want to list this guy as an edge rusher, is wrong. Zabari Zuniga is not an edge rusher. Zabari Zuniga has got the capability of playing on the edge, but he is a versatile lineman that will be used all along the defensive line. He basically can outspeed interior guys up the middle, and he can out strengthen and power guys on the edge. That's what makes him such a unique player. Another player that could have been a first round draft pick had it not been for injuries over his career. That's something that hopefully is behind him. If injuries are behind him, then this is a very good value pick.
Big if there, right? So I think a couple of things. So first of all, injuries are a clear red mark against him because he's suffered from them every single year and had a hard time staying on the field. B, I guess part of it also is after last year's third round pick out of Florida, consider me a little clouded in terms of taking third round pass rushing defensive linemen out of Florida after we saw what happened last year. Clearly new regime, but similarly, there were other guys at that place, a couple of them that I mentioned. I mean, I actually like the kid Gelman, who went to Dallas a lot. I really thought that would have been a nice selection there. I'm hoping Zuniga pans out, but the injury history and the inability to stay on the field to me is a major red flag. It's a situation that the Jets have had issues with players they've selected in the past. We hope that maybe with the training crew that they have, and the surrounding players that are there already on the defensive line, hopefully that helps Zuniga reach his potential. But he does have tremendous physical skills. The problem is those physical skills are always on the sideline, or largely on the sideline, because of the injury history. And like I said, there were other guys that I thought might have been better play there, including Tyler Badatz as the center who went to Dallas. So we'll see what happens with Zuniga at 79. And as you said, the Jets had 101 and they traded down from 101 to pick up a couple of picks in the next round from New England, and also got a 2021 6th-round pick. So they parlayed the 48 into a 59 and 3 other selections.
Also, another 4-year player who made starts all 4 years at Florida. By the way, I've said this before in all sports, and just to remind, that's the reason why when I see a guy like Zuniga or Ashton Davis have had injury concerns, Davis happened after, and it was more of workouts where he didn't get to showcase his skills. I like it when my GM rolls the dice on players that have some minor, it could even be, it's worked really well for my GM with the Washington Nationals, where guys have Tommy John surgery. They could have been a top 10 pick. They end up in the second round. You take them because, hey, Tommy John surgeries, you can recover from that. Other GMs are scared away. You wind up getting a guy around later than you should have, and you take advantage, and that player actually winds up, becoming a really good prospect for you. So I think the same way applies in these sports as well. And I like the philosophy of taking first-round talents in the third round only because of injury concerns. Doesn't always work, but I just like the philosophy. Okay, 4th-round pick, La'Mical Perine from Florida, another Florida Gator. So they're going to be loving life together as Florida Gators. What do they got, like 6 of them on the team now?
I think so.
Yeah, so not a fast player, timed fast player, but somebody that has game speed, according to our lads, which is important. Another one of the team captains, that was, as I mentioned before, the run of team captains that Douglas went after. Another 4-year player, very steady contributor, with really good hands. He catches everything in sight, 72 career receptions, 40 last year, and he's going to help in a variety of ways. He's not a sexy workhorse guy that's going to be a 3-down running back, but he's going to help you in blocking. He's going to help you in the receiving game. He's going to help you in special teams. He's a physical runner. So there's a lot to like about him. He wasn't my favorite running back, but this is, again, why I'm willing to sit back and take a look and see how things go. He's a decent player, and if he can help in the receiving game and help in a variety of ways, which apparently is his calling card, then okay, we'll see how it works out.
They're going to use him as the number 2 back. He projects to be a number 2 back. I'm not sure if he'll be a replacement for Le'Veon Bell down the road, but he does project to be somebody who could be used in a running back committee. As you said, there were other running backs I personally liked. Anthony McFarland a lot better out of Maryland, who ended up going to Pitt. I liked Eno Benjamin a lot better, who ended up going much, much later to Arizona. For me at that point, with the Jets still needing a cornerback, Amik Robertson would have been the play for me at cornerback, who went to Oakland, especially a guy who slipped a little bit. I do understand the need for taking a running back in general. They definitely need the depth. Powell, as much as we like him, clearly is on the downside of his career. Montgomery just wasn't used for whatever reason last year. They view Perine as a guy who could potentially fill in for Bell when necessary. Maybe you can use both of them in the backfield at times. You said a special teamer. Not necessarily the guy, though, that I would have selected at that place, especially if I was looking for a running back with significant upside. But as you said, he is a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. He is a guy who has, you said, game speed, which is hopefully the combination that fills a need for the Jets as Douglas continues to kind of not fill around the edges, but fill areas of need where depth is required.
Yeah, I think what this tells us is, at least it tells me, that they understand that Le'Veon Bell's their guy. And they look at because I think you look at prospects and how are they going to fit on your team? Are you looking for a guy that can be your 3-down guy, be your starter? somebody that could be, whether it's this year or next year, he could be your starting running back. Yeah, maybe you look at a few of the other running backs that you talked about. But I think the Jets are looking for somebody that could be a complement. And that's why they went with Perine. Somebody, again, if you take a look at his report, somebody that could do a lot of other little things. So I understand where they're going with that. I agree. There were other running backs I liked as well. I'm just letting you know, I think that's their reasoning. They've got their guy, Le'Veon Bell, no matter what the media wants to tell us over and over again and keep reminding us how much Adam Gase doesn't like him. But Le'Veon Bell is the running back, and hopefully he'll be here for a long time. Now let's get to their second, fourth round pick. This was one of the picks the Jets did pick up on the trade down. Quarterback James Morgan. And Morgan sure was excited to become a Jet. If you had an opportunity to look at the call that was placed on the website, big guy, strong arm, pocket passer. So another guy that kind of will, this is why, again, we say, how does he fit with your team? The Jets didn't go out and get themselves an athletic quarterback. They got a guy that kind of is a backup to Sam Darnold, another pocket passer, a guy that is not going to use his athleticism to make plays. He is going to help you the way that a Sam Darnold would as a backup. Again, strong arm. He's got that presence you're looking for in all sorts of ways when we're talking about a leader. He's a hard worker. He studies hard in the film room. He's poised in the pocket. So there's a lot of intangibles to like about a guy that's going to be your backup quarterback.
A little bit of a reach maybe in the fourth round. The intangibles are fine. I'm not sure if he has the measurables, but we both thought that they were going to bring in a backup. I mean, Josh McCown was great the first year. They definitely could have used him last year. We talked about Trevor Siemian, and he got hurt last year. They have a backup involved who's nothing phenomenal. So
well,
maybe
keep in mind there was only one other quarterback, I believe, that got picked, and that was Jake Fromm.
Yep.
So I don't.
Eason get picked also?
Who?
Wasn't there
no,
one
Eason
more,
was picked before
right.
Morgan. So
From
so the Jets got the.
Buffalo.
So if the Jets didn't get him, then they were putting themselves in a position to not get a quarterback. So they had to take him where they took him.
Agreed. So I understand the rationale for the pick, as you said. Is it the sexiest pick? Is it the pick that really wows you? Hopefully he develops and becomes a decent backup for Darnold, as we saw last year. The lack of a decent backup was a pretty bad sight last year.
Yeah.
When we saw a couple of games for the Jets.
What do you think this does to so that it looks like it's going to be Fales is going to be the veteran backup?
I would think so. There's no reason not to. Although as we've seen, things can change very much, especially when it comes to training camps and the like. So as of now, I'd say yes, but it could be something that right before the season changes based upon what happens in last-minute cuts.
Yeah, well, again, Fales been with Gase now for a couple of years, so there's a reason he's there. I'm assuming they're looking at him as, okay, if we need him for a few games, he knows the system, we can put him in. And by the way, again, whoever the backup quarterback's going to be if there's an injury this year is going to be a much better position because the talent is going to be so much better for the Jets this year. If the quarterback's the only guy that gets hurt, and everybody else stays healthy, the Jets can win football games with a backup quarterback for a couple of games. Unlike last year when the quarterback got hurt, new system, and everybody else got hurt around him. So I think Fales is a good stopgap for 1 year as a backup, and then they probably would envision Morgan as the long-term backup starting in 2021. That's what I can look at. That's what I would think that their reasoning is. All right, the third and final fourth-round pick went to Cameron Clark. A developmental guy out of Charlotte who had a very good career at Conference USA. He was one of the better linemen in Conference USA, playing tackle, made 35 starts, including 31 straight to end his career. And, I mean, this is a Dean's List guy, a two-time captain, kid that plays with an attitude, can get physical. And I like a couple of lines in the guide. He plays with a heavy, violent hands and with a no-nonsense bouncer's attitude. So this is your perfect developmental quarterback that could end up playing right tackle, or you can move him inside the guard.
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, picking a guy who's had a solid career in college, put up strong numbers in terms of the Conference USA, as you said, smart, Dean's List, 4 years, 4-year player. As we said earlier, when they passed on guys like Jones, and they passed on Tyler Badatz, and they ended up not getting Hennessy or even Matt Peart that went to the Giants. They definitely were in need of getting another offensive lineman, and you got a guy who can look at who could slide inside, most likely play guard as opposed to tackle, and could be a guy who develops into a starter down the road. This year, you could see him spotted in periodically as he gains experience. Like I said, I would have liked a guy earlier who maybe would have been a more of a sure kind of a starter, but given where they selected and getting a guy in Clark, who's also one of those guys that has upside potential and could develop into a starter down the road. Nice selection for where they took him at 129 overall.
All right, the 5th-round pick was another pick where the Jets are hoping to take advantage of an injury to a player who had 1st or 2nd-round potential before the injury, and that's cornerback Bryce Hall. Good size, 6'1", 202, another team captain, made 39 starts over 4 years, led the nation in 2018 with 22 pass breakups, started 6 games last year before the ankle injury, ended his college career. Again, he's got good length, a lot of experience, especially with a variety of techniques. He's got 5 career interceptions, 3 career forced fumbles, 38 career pass breakups, and 4 career sacks. Not bad for someone in the 5th round. It's all about whether or not the injury is behind him.
Yeah, I think the injuries as we heard, he's recovering. He's not fully there. The hope is he'll be fully ready by training camp. But he's another one of those development guys. Guy who probably, as you said, should have and would have gone a lot earlier if he didn't have the significant injury to his ankle. Projected to maybe be a 1st or 2nd rounder. So you get a guy just like Bless Austin last year, who they ended up getting much later than he would have gone because of the injury history. In this case, Hall had a injury, not an injury history, a rather significant one, but sure sounds like he's on his way to recovery, and he projects, if he's healthy, to be a starting cornerback in the NFL, which is something we both know that the team needed. This is one of those picks where you're glad they didn't attempt to trade down. They took a guy in the spot where they probably got lucky. He slid that far. It's one of those things where I really wish they would have had another 5th-round pick. Is we talked about some of the guys they picked in places where they were. The potential to even slide down some more and gather a couple of other picks would have been nice, because there was a couple of guys, a couple of wide receivers like Mooney and Johnson went, Bradley and Nee went late. Muti, who's an offensive lineman, went kind of late. So there's a couple of guys that would have liked to get, but Hall is a major coup and one of the picks that I like the most coming out of this draft right now.
All right, with their final pick, even though we didn't think it was going to be the final pick, it was their first of the 6th-round picks. The Jets hopefully have solved their punting situation and even their kickoff situation for years to come by taking Braden Mann, the consensus top punter in the draft, at pick 191. He was a 2-year punter, a 4-year kickoff specialist, the 2018 Ray Guy winner, given to the nation's top punter. He led the nation that year with 51-yard average and a 44.7 net. And again, also a kickoff specialist, was 4th in the nation last year in kickoff average, including 42 touchbacks. So this was just all about, hopefully, taking care of 2 important spots on your team, most importantly, the punter job. And I think what's interesting about this too is that if the kid works out and then he's your kickoff specialist, it opens the door for the Jets this year to go after a old veteran kicker, a Matt Bryant, an Adam Vinatieri, if they want, because those guys can't kick off anymore. I mean, they're done in that game. But look, I like it because it's a very talented punter. I like the fact that he's cocky too. I think when you're a kicker, you get drafted, you better be cocky, because a lot of times these kickers that get drafted, they just don't work out. But if they're ever going to pick a punter and a specialist like this, I think they got a good one. So, fingers crossed.
Well, clearly ends the Lachlan Edwards era in New York. Man, Ray Guy winner. We've seen in the past, unfortunately, that not that many Ray Guy winners have gone on to be completely successful in the NFL. You're hoping this is different. As you said, he fills a couple of needs. The Jets still don't necessarily have a definitive kicker, but they do have a couple of guys that are under contract right now, and they may bring in a couple of more. was a material issue, as we saw in Week 1 last year, where the kicking game cost them at least one win, if not more than that. But as you said, it's feasible they go after a veteran kicker. There will most certainly be battles in training camp to decide who the kicker would be, and it could be another one of those things that's not locked in until later on. But as we saw, special teams is a huge component in the game. It always has been, and last year the kicking game was a major issue for the Jets. So hopefully fixing at least one side of the equation enables them to be able to find somebody to fix the other one and be a little different in terms of who they target, not necessarily having to worry about kickoffs if man can fill the role.
Yeah, because look, there wasn't a Braden Mann as a place kicker in this draft. That's why you can't get them all in one draft. So hopefully the Jets got their punter and kickoff specialist in this draft, and then you could try and find your place kicker of the future in the next year or two, unless they get lucky. And if Maher or Ficken end up the kicker this year, they're still young enough where if they have a very good year, then maybe. All right, the last pick ended up being a trade with the Colts. Once again, with the Colts. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with Rex Hogan as the assistant GM and all the especially at defensive back. The Jets now have 3 Colt defensive backs who were all there when Hogan was with the Colts. And Quincy Wilson, it comes to the Jets, a former second-round draft pick who is only 23 years old. And hey, you know what? You get him for a 6th-round draft pick. And the reason the Jets did it because the Colts were going to drop him, and the Jets didn't know if they'd be able to get him. So they said, you know what? In order to ensure we get this kid and nobody else picks him up, we'll give you a 6th-round pick for him. And I love the move. 6th-round draft picks don't usually make the team. So if you're going to get a guy with 2nd-round talent who goes to a different team, who by the way, worked really well as a slot corner covering tight ends. He did a great job on Travis Kelce last year. He's got the potential. He's going to be with a new team. So let's hope that the new change of scenery, he's a 1-year guy. That's where his contract was going to run out. So the reason the Colts got rid of him. So it's a 1-year kind of trial. This does not mean the Jets are not going to try and sign Logan Ryan, but it's good insurance policy.
I'm okay with the trade. I mean, we said, when we started this call and conversation that you don't know how players are going to pan out until about 3 years. And Wilson right now is a 2nd rounder, clearly has not lived up to his draft status. To me, I understood the rationale. He said if they're going to waive a guy, giving up some capital to get him so nobody else gets him is understandable. To me, though, I really wanted KJ Hill, who kept slipping on the board. It would have been a nice addition for wide receiver for the Jets, and would have preferred somehow trying to trade a future draft pick as opposed to one this year. Maybe using the 2nd Patriots pick in the 6th round next year, or even a 7th rounder, especially if the Colts were to get nothing if they ended up waiving him. Wilson gives them additional depth in the defensive backfield, which we talked about. But as I said, in my opinion, Hill was probably a guy who I had thought might go even the 4th round. And for him to go in the 7th round would have been a nice addition, in my opinion, to the Jets, especially since they need help at wide receiver. But they did give themselves additional depth at defensive back, and maybe Wilson with a new scheme around him under Williams plays a little bit more like the guy who we saw. But it is a 1-year trial run for him, considering his contract ends after the season.
Okay, now let's talk about this morning finding out you always find out about these rookie free agents or who are the guys who your team signs. And usually there's always a player or two. Remember last year, the Jets made out tremendously with Kyle Phillips, who was one of their top free agent signings, and he had an excellent season for the Jets. So you're going to find players. Usually you get lucky once or twice. But this year, I don't think I have ever seen the Jets stockpile more guys that were draftable players since I've been following the whole rookie free agent pool. So let's start out on offense with you mentioned wide receiver. So the Jets picked up a wide receiver with a lot of experience, another 4-year grad transfer who ended up another injury player who could have been drafted if it wasn't for the foot injury, and Lawrence Cager.
Yeah, I mean, Cager, wide receiver, Georgia, considered an ascending prospect with upside, size, and bulk and radius. As you said, the foot surgery likely either pushed him down the board or took him off people's boards. The Jets were really aggressive in terms of signing him. As I caught up last night, you can see him was pretty much right away after the draft. They announced the signing, so clearly it's a guy that Douglas and the scouts had targeted as the draft went on, for a guy who didn't get drafted, to try to lock him up quickly before somebody else did. And one of those guys is, if you're going to add a guy and you're going to take a flyer, he's a pretty good guy to take a flyer on. Another guy who's got size, as we've seen with Mims and with Perriman. Size is something that I wouldn't say imperative, but something that seems to be a key focus of this new regime.
Yeah, thank goodness, right? Because Cager's even bigger. He's 6'4", 220. And Cager was Fromm's #1 target by midseason. That's when Georgia was starting to pick up steam. And Cager was the guy because he was playing Fromm with a bunch of young kids. Then Cager injured his foot. And as soon as that happened, and Georgia played, I mean, if you saw the Georgia LSU game, the championship game, you could see Georgia just had nothing offensively. They couldn't move the football in the passing game, and the reason was he didn't have his favorite target, Cager. So, but yeah, where the Jets got him, you're looking more than likely as someone on the practice squad early on in his career. But hey, with the depth that the Jets have right now at receiver, meaning the battles that they're going to have, now you're going to have Josh Doctson battling with Josh Bellamy and Vincent Smith, along with Cager, for that final spot or two. I think Vincent Smith's going to end up making this team if he just keeps getting better and better. So I think the final spot on the roster at receiver might end up being, someone like Doctson or Josh Bellamy, and they still haven't even decided whether to resign Demaryius Thomas yet. Another guy with size. All right, offensive line. The Jets picked up another developmental tackle from Washington, Jared Hilbers.
Yeah, Hilbert's played both gap and zone, which is good. Has experience. Another guy who they said improved during the Shrine Week, which to me shows he's coachable. A guy who could develop even more under better coaching. And we both happen to know that the Jets have a very good offensive line coach, which is something that came out last year, which is another plus by taking Becton and Clark in the draft. Projects to be a backup swing tackle, but another guy who's got upside potential, which is what you want to get with guys now. Guys who have an outside shot at making your team and could develop into a lot more than just a backup on your team, but guy who could end up playing a role and a key role in the future.
Well, again, you got Hilbers now and Clark are your developmental guys. Clark will definitely make the roster unless he's a bust. Hilbers is definitely a developmental practice squad candidate. But these are good guys, and with Joe Douglas and his scouting ability, you have to have some confidence there that he knows what he's doing. By the way, I was looking at a depth chart. Someone put up a depth chart of the Jets. It might have been on Twitter, I don't know, but it was one of the top writers, and he actually looked at the offensive line, and they had Alex Lewis starting over Brian Winters. Look, if Brian Winters is on this team, he's not a backup. They are not going to pay Brian Winters, $7 million, whatever they're paying him, to be a backup. So I don't know who was putting that together or what the idea was, but you are wrong. Brian Winters is going to be a backup. He's not going to be on this team. So, and by the way, he's better than Alex Lewis anyway. I still think Brian Winters is not a bad guard if he's surrounded by better talent. The question is he worth it financially? Okay, defense. Now, let's talk about 3 corners. Boy, they did a really good job of just inundating their room, their cornerback secondary room, with a bunch of young cornerback prospects. Not only did they bring in Quincy Wilson in the draft, who was only 23. Of course, Desir comes in as a free agent. They've got Austin and Mollett, the young kids. They got Kyron Brown from last year from Akron, who still may be somebody to keep an eye on. And then Hall was drafted in the 5th round. And then 3 corners were signed, all draftable grades. Let's start with the kid from Alabama, Shaheem Carter.
Anytime you can get an Alabama defensive player, you're getting a guy who's played in big games, guy who's used to stiff competition, always around the ball. Carter last year, needs to work on his route running in terms of being able to stick with receivers. But is a guy who's played nickel, projects to play that kind of role potentially in the NFL. Another guy who comes, as I said, with big game experience, which is always welcome. But the fact that he was a nickel on that team shows that he's able to handle key roles and projects to be maybe a nickel kind of defensive backup defensive back in the NFL.
Yeah, he also played safety in 2018, so he's versatile, which is good. A little undersized, but another guy who has to make it on special teams if he is going to end up on the final roster. I like the fact that he's also an aggressive kid and a secure tackler as well. All right, let's talk about Lamar Jackson from Nebraska. And this is another guy with some experience. He's a 3-year starter.
Yep. Played press man coverage, physical play. One of those things we have not always seen amongst the Jets defensive backs, and especially in the recent past, is a guy who's willing to be physical at the line. One of the things he does need to work on is pattern recognition, which is something that'll come with the coaching around him. But you're getting a potential physical cornerback guy who's willing to, get dirty with receivers. Press coverage, you don't see much of that, especially in college these days. Guys are willing to be up on the line and using their hands effectively. So it's another guy who projects maybe to play a role down the road, but it's a guy who also will probably be a special teamer in the future.
And a guy that, look, when you 6'2", 208, and so you've got the size and the length and the physicality that is inviting, and you don't get drafted. Well, the main reason is he ran a real slow time. So, when you're running about a 4.6, that's kind of slow for a corner, for an outside corner, because that's what he is. So that's the reason he slipped. We'll see. All right, and then finally, Javelin Guidry from Utah was another player that the Jets picked up at corner, and this guy is freaking fast.
Yep, that's what he's known for: quickness, agility, outstanding recovery speed. Clearly needs to learn how to be a bit more physical, but the speed aspect of a guy on the outside is there. And one of those things you like to see with your defensive backs is a guy who, A, has speed, but not just speed, but has the ability, if he does get beat, to recover and get back and knock passes away. And Guidry's one of those guys that seems to have that in spades.
And the last guy I wanted to bring up who wasn't in the guide is Bryce Huff. This is a kid that was a linebacker at Memphis, and he ended up with 18 career sacks and 39.5 career tackles for loss. Remember last year when we were talking about guys that the Jets remember the kid that they were trying to sign? What was it? The kid Reed from Nevada. Was it UNLV he played on, or was it Nevada? I forget. One of the two. Might have been Nevada. And we were like, yeah, I mean, you take a look. Yeah, he had the kind of numbers that Huff had. Like, yeah, it'd be nice to have a guy like that. He was a typical 3-4 kind of edge rusher. Well, the Jets lost out, and he wound up going to Denver, and he actually made the team, and he did a pretty good job for him. So here's a guy kind of like that. Don't know if it's going to work out the way it worked out for Denver, but anybody that can accumulate nearly 40 tackles for loss and 18 sacks over his 3 years playing at Memphis is not bad. So, especially that's still the Jets' primary need. Because let's wrap up by talking about what the Jets have to do, because they couldn't get it all done this year. So it looks like what they've got to do is, if Brett Perryman or Denzel Mims doesn't turn out to be a number one guy, they still need a number one receiver. And I think the only other is they need to find out if they got a number one corner, and they also need an edge rusher. Again.
Right. And the offensive line, you're not
hopefully we got that
really
taken
helps,
care of. Yeah.
Right, but they didn't grab a lot of guys early who potentially will slot in as a starter. So with Winters probably having one more year left and some of the other question marks, there definitely still needs to be more work done on the offensive line as well.
Well, it's possible. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's hope that you have McGovern. I mean, these are all guys that are going to be that should play for 5 or 6 years at minimum in the prime of their careers. You got McGovern, you've got Adoga, you've got Van Routen. You have now Becton, And I guess the last question is going to be maybe a Duga, does he wind up playing guard or tackle? And if he winds up playing guard, which I think that's where they're going to try him out. My guess is they want Duga to start at guard so that maybe they could cut Winters and then have Fant now play right tackle and Becton left tackle, or of course vice versa, depending on when Becton's ready to play left tackle.
I think that's the plan also.
Okay. Bottom line, again, I absolutely felt that Joe Douglas did his job and more. I think that this was the reason he was brought here. I don't think that you could have asked for more. Sure, just like I said before, there were a lot of players as the picks went on that I was hoping the Jets were going to pick and they didn't. But when I look back and I see everything that was done with the trades and just how the roster is today with free agency and the draft compared to what it looked like when the season ended last year, I think the Jets have found themselves a good general manager so far.
I like the thing Douglas did. I mean, I don't share the same affinity, or I know the grade you kind of set me last night. I do think he did a very solid job. Like you said, there were guys who I wanted there who I thought would have upped the grade or would have filled needs slightly better than the guys he took into positions where he took them. But we'll know that as this year wears on, but especially in a couple of years down the road. Right now, it's pure speculation. But they definitely filled some needs. We knew that this was not going to be just a one-year process to fill everything. It's going to be, unfortunately, a several-year process, but they definitely got a jump start in terms of what they did this offseason and then also in the draft this year.
And hopefully we'll get to see these players out there in some sort of capacity, training camp, whatever, as soon as possible. I'll give it another few weeks, and then these politicians can go, I don't know, I'm not going to say it, but anyway, because I think generally we all want to get back to work now. It's time to get back to work. It's time for these kids to get out on the field and start practicing and participating in their own workplace. I think it's going to happen sooner than people think, and I'm definitely hoping that we can get these politicians out of the way and we can get our lives back. So let's hope that continues, and hopefully we'll have another show sometime soon to talk about what's going on with this roster, which has now been replenished. So, Jan, appreciate it as always. Thanks for your time, and hopefully we'll be talking hockey too before we talk football again.
That would be very nice.
Yes, it would. All right, for Jan Levine, I'm Greg DePalma. And again, our lads draft guide. Don't forget the draft review guide comes out in about a month. So we'll be talking about that as well. For Jan Levine, I'm Greg DePalma. We'll see you next time on Jets FM.